Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow. I'm your host, Waddell, aka Deuce85, and it is a great little Friday night. Whoa, let me get it right here. A great little Friday night in the CBB streets. We are preparing ourselves for a bright and early morning of college football. We are riding the high of the first week of college basketball, and it has been an absolute fun time helping you guys win money and myself, and just overall getting to tilt with you guys and enjoy the college basketball atmosphere once again. You may notice the CFB Super Show banner is behind me. I have to be back. I don't have to be, but I want to be back in the morning, bright and early at 8 a.m. And I just don't want to have to deal with putting the CFB banner back up in the morning when I'm fumbling around with coffee and everything else. So this is the CBB show, but you got the football banner behind me for right now. I'll make it seem like it's a big deal to change the banner. It's not, but bear with me here. Reason I wasn't around too much, I'll tell you a little story here. Too much for the tilting and everything. I was at work. It's been a busy week anyways, right? Like the figuring out college football and college basketball together. I've done it in years past, but it's very time consuming, but I like doing it. Love doing it. My regular day job, that's also been very difficult this week. And then I get a frantic text about an hour maybe after lock, maybe not even that, 30 minutes after lock. Your son has slipped and he's crying and we don't know if his leg's broken and you need to come home. And I'm like trying to talk the missus down, and telling her like, double check, maybe he just sprained it. Maybe it's a bruise. He's all of 19 months, by the way. He's not even 2 years old yet. Kid's nuts, absolutely nuts. I have 4 kids, 2 girls who are super easy as young, like 2-3 year olds. Now they're both 6+ and they're not easy at all. And my oldest son, who's now almost 18, if you can believe that, total hell beast as a toddler. And he's like super well-mannered, well-behaved, hangs out with his girlfriend, gives me no grief. So I'm hoping that his little brother, who is giving us a run for our money, ends up the same as him. But my God, and both broke. My son, who's now 18, broke his arm when he was 2. That's important to the story as well. So I got to come home because she doesn't handle the stresses very well, and that's fine. So we get home. He's obviously in a lot of pain. Have to take him to the ER. Go through the X-rays, X-ray techs. Total dodo brains. Just super idiotic. I'm having to sit there and hold him. He's crying. He's freaking out, and they're like taking their sweet time. It's like, those people did not play PJ Hall tonight. With as mush-brained as they were, they certainly did not play PJ Hall in their lineups. I can guarantee that. Got it all done. Find out that he has this is what they said. It's either a small fracture or a shadow of the X-ray. That's legitimately what they told me. So we got X-ray techs who are slow, don't know to play PJ Hall, and then we got a doctor who can't tell the difference between a shadow and a fracture. So that's how my evening went. He had to get a splint and all that, and it's just like, this kid, man, I'm gonna have to strap him down to the bed or something. I won't really do that. Don't call anyone. That would have to give me trouble. But I don't know how this is gonna go. But I was thinking I was gonna have to cancel the show because I figured we're gonna be in the ER for a couple hours. One thing I will say is they were uber fast. Got a hold of my boss, Mike Randall, said, hey, I think we're gonna be able to do this. We'll have to do it an hour later if that's cool with you. He says, if you can do it, and we can do it. So we're doing it, and here we are. Doing it. Wow. So I appreciate the continued support because I want to make sure that we put something out for you guys. You guys have done amazingly awesome with not only supporting the show with views, likes, comments, shares, all that. A lot of you are also like having people come on and telling them about the promotion that we're running and getting them to sign up and check out what FTN's all about. And that's just like totally amazing. The best way that you could possibly repay me. If I helped you win at all, you enjoy the shows, anything like that. Like, I never ask for tips. I don't expect tips. I don't ever like be like, oh, you won something, like you want to break me off. Like, I would never say that. I would never expect anything like that. I only ask that if you can pay it forward by sharing it, commenting, liking. If you've got somebody who's maybe asking around about college basketball, college football, whatever, hell, even if they're asking about pro sports, like that I don't cover, like show them the FTN link, tell them how great it is for you, and the discount that we have going on, which is 50% off your first month of any subscription at FTN Daily. Night Hoops, NIGHTHOOPS. We have gotten a pleasantly surprising amount of new subs with that code, which is great. So that is how you can show your appreciation. I definitely hope that you guys continue to do that, and I hope that we continue to have a great night. Before we get into a great week, great season, all that good stuff, before we get into the 7-game slate, which I got to tell you, I would have loved to have seen a little bit more, but we did just get down with a 12-gamer, which was awesome. We have college football all day tomorrow. That still is going to take precedence. Still going to be doing shows every Friday night, but Saturdays are going to primarily be dedicated to college football for me. I have 2 articles that are going to be dropping. I have a pre-lock show, so I might not be as available beforehand. And what gets really tricky with this is that CBB and CFB's main slates both lock at the same time. So 9 a.m. PST for me, midnight or noon EST for those of you without a covered wagon. So if you are asking me questions, usually that pre-lock show takes me like up to the last 10 minutes before lock. So if you're asking college basketball related questions for this one, I might not be able to get to you in time for lock. I'll certainly do my best, but that first game, Connecticut and Stonehill, I may not have the goods for you here. So hopefully this show will be in-depth enough for you to take from that. And there will also be a top place article that drops in the morning for that as well. But I'm just going to be super hyper focused on CFB. It is week 11. We're going to be in bowl season before you know it. So a couple more weeks of overlap, and then we'll be full blown, bowl season, talking about that. And then every day, grinding college basketball. So no fears there, but I just wanted to give everybody a heads up of what tomorrow morning is going to look like for me and how content is going to be structured. Going forward, the show schedule is going to be pretty consistent. Monday, Tuesday, and Friday nights will be the CBB version of the show. There might be some others added in there from time to time, but that's going to be for the next 2 months, pretty much our consistent show schedule. So we'll be covering the big Tuesday slate. Generally, Wednesday is fairly large. And then as we get into deeper in the season, closer to conference play for CBB, those Saturday slates become pretty big, pretty aggressive, lots of prize pools, lots of good stuff. So that Friday night show will be dedicated to that Saturday main slate, mostly DK focused. If FanDuel, they continue to have some contests where they are showing for, more than a couple of games and more than showdowns, then we'll start to kind of branch out and talk about FanDuel as well. But for now, it's going to be mainly DraftKings focused until FanDuel proves otherwise. And then college football will still be the Thursday main slate breakdown with Jay Kuchek and I, and then the Saturday morning live before lock show that I do. That will still be continuing on for the rest of the season. The Thanksgiving week schedule will be a little different. I know I've done Thanksgiving shows in the past, but we're hosting this year, so I'm not going to be able to pull that off. So we will be moving the show to Wednesday night of Thanksgiving. Jake will still be joining me. That'll still be at 9 p.m. PST. There's usually big slates the day after and Saturday, so there might be a possibility that shows regarding the Friday slate. Haven't decided how that's going to look yet, but that is what the content schedule is going to look like, just so you guys are aware. All right, let's get into hey, Johnny, Stanford 2-0. Hey. Brandon Angel, bro. I told you Brandon Angel was that guy. So before we get into this one, I also want to talk about tonight. So, and I try not to waste too much time. Most of you are watching this. You don't want to hear a recap of what we just did, but it's been a nice week. And I have to say that this feels so much more like pre-ban 2017, like 2013, late 2013, 2014 to 2017 college basketball. Novembers were easily the most profitable of this until you get to March. March, of course, make it profitable, lots of casuals, great. But November CBB that tends to be one of the more profitable months. In the last season, especially with broken pricing, it was really hard to find players that we could get enough leverage on that weren't like 60% owned, right? And we were able to find a ton this week, and that's just been really, really encouraging. Obviously, some don't work out. I had Noah Carter today. He didn't shoot very well, had 20 fantasy points, wasn't great, wasn't terrible, but that one didn't work out. Obviously, Corin Johnson didn't work out because he didn't start. He still played over 20 minutes, just shots weren't there. Nate Colmies didn't play barely at all, so that one really hurt him, but obviously that one missed. The other night, Dame Adelkun, who I loved, high fantasy point per minute player, scored 17.5 fantasy points in 12 minutes. Obviously didn't pay off his salary. Had he played a normal allotment of minutes that he probably deserves, that one would have been a smash play. So we certainly missed a couple of that have been lower owned plays, and we own those. But when we hit these Chance Moores and these Tyler Perrys, like, we do need to take a second to pat ourselves on the back and be like, man, that felt really good. Tonight's was Angelo Breezy, who at 4.8 and 8.8% dropped a 30 spot. Now I thought it would be through his scoring. So I will say he got there from steals, which I wasn't expecting, but we'll take it nonetheless, right? Then you have Julian Reese, who we love. We love Maryland's Julian Reese. Nobody ever rosters him. He's almost 8K, 8.8% as well in some of the cash game single entry stuff. 36 fantasy points, had some trouble there, but 16 and 11 double-double. We'll take that all day from him. And then, of course, the all-encompassing FTN brand favorite, that is PJ Hall of Clemson, 16% in GPPs, about 30 in some of the cash and single entry stuff, that WTAs and all that. But 16% for PJ Hall going into a game against UAB, where they're going to be playing at a pace and a style that's conducive to a lot of fantasy points being scored. Jake Heidbreder has decided they're redshirting him for next year because they have a litany of guard options, and PJ Hall's just going to be the alpha. No Hunter Tyson, obviously he's in the NBA to Denver now, and Hall's going to absorb a lot of those rebounds. Remember, Tyson was scored 12, 13, 14 points, but he was grabbing like 10 to 12 rebounds really consistently. PJ Hall bound 3 to 5 because of that. There's no Tyson. They have Ian Shiflin, but they mostly have role players that all play their roles really well, but no stars in the front court. So PJ Hall is able to play this hybrid wing front court combo player that is going to be able to rebound at a high level, and he threw down another 9 rebounds tonight, 27 real points on his way to 52 fantasy points. Let's just say that felt extremely fucking good to hit a play like PJ Hall that a lot of the industry wasn't on. So I'll pat yourselves on the back. Very, very good evening. Hopefully that can continue. Either way, I feel that we're going to be competitive, and this is just going to be continual, a fun season. It's a couple of plays or a couple of teams that lost tonight and some that are struggling right now. UCLA is only up by 4 on Lafayette midway through the second half. Cal's only up 1 on Pacific deep into the second half there. So we're seeing some teams really struggle. West Virginia lost to Monmouth today. Xander Rice with a massive 30-point real game. That was pretty surprising. LSU lost on a buzzer beater or semi-buzzer beater to Nichols. This is just another year of parity, folks. We're going to see teams that, up top, yes, there's going to be some murderers row squads, but we already saw Michigan State fall. Now we see Duke fall to a very good Arizona team. Parity is going to make this year another fantastic and intriguing one, and we're going to see another low to mid-major make a deep tournament run, and that is just exciting stuff. It's going to be a great season. I can't wait. Oh, did they lose? Okay, I saw they were up by 1. Let me my screen hadn't updated. Well, then add them to another one that loses to a low major. All right, enough about that. Let's get into the main DK slate here, which is 7 games. Rolls throughout the afternoon. First game there at 9 a.m. Go PST. I'm just going to be talking in West Coast time, to 3 p.m. So all day affair there while we're grinding college football stuff. We'll be able to check in and look at all these different scores and starting lineups. We'll start with the UConn Stonehill side, and we're going to get into some Ken Palm stuff tonight and start getting into those numbers. Still really, really early for that, but let's check it out and see. So the Ken Palm projected score here, 86-52 over Stonehill. We know the Huskies defense is going to be an elite unit all season long. It's going to be hard for any team Big East or not, to score against them. In the first game, starters were predictably Tristan Newton, Alex Karaban, Cam Spencer, Stephen Castle, and Donovan Clingan. Off the bench, they brought Hassan Diarra, Solo Ball, and Samson Johnson, and then a bunch of guys, Jaden Ross, Jalen Stewart, Yusuf Singar, off the bench. They're under 10 minutes. And I think that's a lot of what the rotation is going to be. We're going to see Diarra play that main six-man role. Johnson, Ball, and Ross are going to get anywhere from 8 to 15 minutes pretty much regardless of score there. Less when it's competitive, more when it's a blowout. And then Jalen Stewart, still pretty raw. Would have loved to have seen him come to Washington Huskies. I'm going to say that a lot this year, but I think eventually he will turn out to be a key piece. But right now, minutes are going to be tough to come by. So what we're looking at here is probably another situation where the UConn guys are going to range anywhere from 18 to 25 minutes. Newton did play 30 in that game, Karaban 28, Spencer 28, but Castle just 19. I'm expecting about 20 from him again. And then Clingan, who's still working his way back to full health, had a nice game. Usage rate off the charts, 40%, just 15 minutes, but 12 points, 8 rebounds, 3 blocks, just a total stud. There's going to be games where he plays over 25 minutes and he's just going to murder the slate. This is probably not a good enough spot for me to pay 8.5 for him, so I will wait there. I still think he has a solid chance at putting up close to 30, but there's just a big opportunity cost there. And when you look up and down this slate, you're going to see it's the polar opposite of what we saw today. We had a plethora of cheap, underpriced options that allowed us to stuff in Norchad Omier, PJ Hall, Julian Reese, all these top tier plays easily because of Ryan Dunn and Henry Salas being super low priced, Breezy being low priced, all these cheap guys. There are cheap guys available today, but there are a lot of stiffer pricing points, and it's going to be more difficult to make that style of studs and scrubs lineup, at least a competitive one, with all being said. So I don't really love the idea of paying almost 8K for my guy Karaban either. I do love him, and he did have 36 in that first game, which was phenomenal. 3 from 6 from downtown and 7 rebounds. You love seeing that. He's certainly not a horrible play because a traditionally tough to fill forward slot. Karaban does fill that for us. He's probably the play that I would be the most comfortable with if you're taking a UConn starter. Not there with Castle at 7.4. I think there will be a time and place for him. Spencer at 7.1 is going to mainly be a shooter, relief type player, so it's going to be tough to play him as well. And then even the bench pieces like Diarra, almost 5'8", Johnson 6'1", you really can't get to them either. I know Samson Johnson had 22 the other day, but we're not paying 6.1 for the off chance that he plays 15 minutes and puts up 20 to 25 fantasy points. That's just kind of silly. You do have GPP shots on Solo Ball at 4.6 and Jalen Stewart at 3.8. But overall, I think we can safely avoid the Huskies in our main lineup, and we're not going to get too beat up over it. Now, when you go to the Stonehill side, there is some players I'm interested in here, and obviously a very tough situation to be on the road against UConn and expecting them to do much of anything besides just get stuffed in a locker. When you look at what they did to Northern Arizona, it was 95 to 52. Any potential fantasy viability, we look through Liam Lloyd, 35 minutes, 15 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 steals. Very good game. Carson Basham, who we're familiar with from the Pepperdine days. He was a Pepperdine player a year or two ago. High block rate, had 3 blocks, 6 points, 6 rebounds, decent in 25 minutes. So what I'm getting at here is there's some really nice plays on Stonehill. But we need to not get too crazy here because majority of them are going to be between 3 and 10 fantasy points, and that's obviously going to be a disaster. Now, the first play that sticks out is Maxwell Zagorowski. And you may remember the name Zagorowski. Sounds familiar. Gosh, who's Zagorowski? Zags like that. Who could that be? Oh, I know. DFS hero Marcus Zagorowski from Creighton. They are brothers. Go figure. They are the half-brother of Michael Carter Williams. If you didn't know that, the only reason I know that about Max is because I knew that about Marcus. And since they're twin brothers, I have to assume that their half brothers are the same as well. So you have the a little fun tidbit there with Max Zagorowski. Now in his first game there, let me pull this up. Let me pull up Stonehill. I have a lot of windows open. I need to do something about that. Oh, by the way, I'm going to start doing in 2 weeks a minutes projection sheet. I don't know how super accurate it'll be at first, but we're going to work towards that. And also I'm going to start sharing my screen when I do have that. So if that's something that you might be interested in, please let me know later on in DMs or in passing when we're talking later if that's something that you'd be interested in. Because I've been thinking about sharing my screen on certain things for a while, and I figured out how to do it. So, yeah. All right, so Stonehill, they are 2 games into the season already. Just played yesterday against Army in a 57-44 win, and then they played the mighty George Washington. One of our subs that's been for years is a big George Washington fan, actually talked to me about this game in Stonehill because Garrett Johnson, who's a great story. If you don't know about Garrett Johnson, you should definitely Google him and look him up on Twitter. Very, very cool story. So Stonehill's 2 games into the season here. And so far, Max Zagorowski has been pretty solid overall. Against Army, he played 39 minutes, 23% usage rate, 21 points. He gets 6 triples. That's very Zags of him. You know, if he's hitting the threes, he might be able to get that nickname. 8 rebounds and a block. The George Washington game, when they got their doors blown off, 8 points, missed all 3 of his threes, but 9 rebounds and 2 assists in 27 minutes. Now, he's reasonably priced there at 5'3". He fills a forward slot, but that UConn front court, man, it's dangerous. So he's not going to be getting anywhere near 9 rebounds against UConn, but he's also a versatile forward that can pull his defender out and shoot threes, and he's not afraid to do so. And that's going to be tough for some of the bigger UConn front court defenders to stick with him. So he does have that going for him, but we are looking at a Stonehill team that is very undersized compared to UConn's giants like Donovan Clingan. Like, they are running Zagorowski at center a lot of times, and he's 6'8". They also run a freshman at center that's 6'7". So this isn't the best spot for him. He may end up having to be on Clingan at times, and that's certainly worrisome. He doesn't have a history of being a fouler, so that's great, but I just don't know how this is going to work out for him too well. So far this year, 46% from long range in those 2 games. I like him. I think he's a pretty solid play. I'm kind of considering using him, honestly, but there's definitely some downside to doing so at 5'3", because if he was 4K, 3'8", even 4'5", like, we could justify in our minds and be like, okay, he gets 15, we can live with that. At 5'3", he gets under 3x. You know, it's almost like, damn, this slate's over for me already. But then again, there's going to be a lot of lower scoring on this particular slate, so you might not be dead to rights with that, but it's certainly not the way you want to start. So as of this moment, Max Zagorowski certainly in our player pool, but we do have to consider the upcoming opponent and how that's going to affect his rebounding numbers. The starting lineup typically for Stonehill, we'll look at the Army game here. In addition to Zagorowski, Shane Odell, Tony Felder, Pano Pavlidis, and Louis Simona. None of Felder, Pavlidis, Simona are any kind of interesting. Shane Odell, high usage rate, certainly someone to potentially look at. And then off the bench, the senior point guard, Jackson Benigi, 26% usage rate, 14 points, shot 12 times, made 7 of them, had 2 steals. You come over here and look, he's about 4'1". Perhaps we can look at him. Odell at 4'3". Perhaps we can look at him. But overall, I think it's just going to be Zagorowski or nobody for me in the main lineup. I'm a little bit nervous about getting too involved with this Stonehill team. All right, moving on to another game that should be relatively uncompetitive. Not competitive. Uncompetitive? I don't know. Houston versus Texas A&M Corpus Christi. This one is a 85-57 projection on Ken Palm. Houston's played 1 game against Louisiana Monroe, and my God, it just doesn't matter what this roster has. Say what you will about Calvin Sampson over the years, that dude is just a surgical tactician when it comes to teaching his kids how to play defense. This is going to be another top 3 year for them defensively. They're just going to be making it so very difficult. You have to feel for Louisiana Monroe because they were clearly overmatched. They had 4 different players get 3+ fouls. Really nothing doing at any point. And that Louisiana Monroe team has a player by the name of Tyreek LaCour who played for South Alabama, played for UAB, was actually pretty good in both places, but he was absolutely no match for this Houston team. Now, Houston ran the starting five of this, and it's a slightly new look starting five because they lost several pieces, right? LJ Cryer, Juwan Roberts, Manny Sharp, Javier Francis, and Jamal Shed. Now, Cryer is the only real new piece to that, but we're used to seeing Francis and Sharp as bench pieces. Off the bench, they did bring Damian Dunn, which I thought was a little bit interesting. Malik Wilson, Ramon Walker, Joseph Tugler, and Terrence Arsenault. A lot of people love Terry Arsenault. Really good player off the bench, somebody who I think will end up being viable this year once the pecking order kind of shakes itself out. Now, when you look at Houston pricing, it starts with Damian Dunn at 8K, and that's a pretty easy fade, even though it's a great for 20, 25 fantasy points in 18 minutes like he did in their last game. But are we really wanting to pay 8K knowing that, if he starts, maybe it's a different story. Like if Dunn jumps in the starting lineup and we're thinking, okay, 25, 30 minutes, like, okay, we could probably maybe get there. But as a coming off the bench piece, that seems a little bit too steep. Juwan Roberts at 7.7, same thing. I think we're talking about less than 25 to 22 minutes, something like that. It's gonna be kind of tough for me. Jamal Shed at 7.5, same thing. Like, how many more minutes over 20 are they actually gonna get in a game that they just brutalized another team? Manny Sharp was really good, 20 real points. Didn't do a whole lot else, but he made 4 threes. He obviously has the green light, but 6'8" for just strictly a guy shooting threes early on. LJ Cryer, he is the one that I would most be looking at 6'4". He played 30 minutes, but he did the worst of the starters, right? He had 16.5 fantasy points, but he only made 1 of his 9 threes, 3 of his 13 shots. So he just was ice cold, couldn't get that shot making going. And that's going to be an important piece for Houston as they get into conference play and start this, Big 12 journey, playing tough opponents every night. They're going to need LJ Cryer. So I do like him a lot at 6'4" for GPPs. I'm a little bit worried about, taking him after that shooting performance. It's very early in the season. But again, minutes are in flux, and he may not get 30 this time. Maybe they give it to Arsenault. Maybe Damian Dunn plays 25. It's really tough for me to say for sure. Terry Arsenault at 4.7, definitely in play. Off the bench, they're getting around 20 minutes. He's a guy that can fill it up in all categories. So that is a value piece that we can certainly look at there. And then as a starter, Javier Francis at 4.5, man, his rates are really quite good. Love to see him get anywhere between like 22 to 27 minutes on a nightly basis. If we can, as the season goes on, get that from Javier Francis, I think he puts up a really big number. Looking at his fantasy point per minute number, it's definitely impressive. But you go back and you look at last year's as a sophomore, his rates in a more limited role where he didn't play a ton of minutes, right? He 15, 9, 11. He did have a spot start last year, 21 minutes against South Florida. In that game, he had 6 points, 6 rebounds, 3 blocks, 3 steals, just an animal. Looking at last year's combined rebounding rate, well over 35%, a block rate of 15%, steal rate of 2%. Did have a high foul rate. That is going to be a issue with Javier that's going to affect his minutes. And you look at the game against Monroe, 18 minutes played as a starter, usage rate somewhat low, 16, whatever. But made all of his field goals, 9 points, got to the foul line, made 3 of 4, 4 rebounds, a block, 2 steals, but there were 3 fouls glaring there. Just gets a little handsy, similar to Julian Reese, tries to make those highlight blocks. But shit, his price is definitely making him in play for me at 4.5. I don't particularly want to use too many UConn or Houston players in these early blowouts. But pricing, if I just let that dictate where I go, Francis at 4.5 certainly makes a lot of sense. Malik Wilson at 4.2, he's been around the block. We know he's been for several teams. 16 minutes is all it took for him to get to 20 at 4.2. I could see people probably desperate for value playing Wilson. It's not a horrible play by any means, but again, what happens if he bricks his first 3 shots, and doesn't get those blocks and steals? Then suddenly we're talking about a guy with 8 fantasy points at 4.2. It's kind of just not going to get it done, right? And then the youngster Joe Tugler played 13 minutes. He's going to end up being a really solid player as well. Had 13 fantasy points, 1 point per minute. That's quick maths for you at home, Johnny. But yeah, Houston, I'm mostly fading here unless I'm playing Francis, which as a starter, I could certainly feel pretty good about doing so. Looking at the opponent here, and we have really like no data to go off of, right? Corpus Christi played a non D1 in their first game. They did give up a bunch of rebounds, but it's really, I can't derive anything from that game. So it's hard to say if they're going to be a very good rebounding team or not, because everybody's going to look like a really solid rebounding group against Southwestern Adventist. The players who they rolled in the starting five: Gary Clark, Owen Deese, Stephen Giwa, Marion Humphrey, and Jordan Roberts. But they ended up going 13, 14 deep, all of them playing between 12 to 15 minutes. So outside of the starting group, it would be tough to recommend anyone. And I'm not going to be in the habit of taking too many players against Houston very often. The only time I really feel comfortable doing that is when we get to late season tournament and we have a player like Norchad Omir, who is basically matchup proof and smacks around that Houston team like he did last year. But I'm not looking at anyone on the Texas A&M Corpus Christi team that plays like Norchad Omir. So Owen Deese definitely looking like a guy that is going to take a ton of shots for them. But at 5K, are we risking him against Houston where they're just going to handcuff him anyways? Probably not. Probably not going to do that. Yes, Johnny, because they blew them out. I am aware, my friend. All right, so Creighton, we're going to move on to the next one here. Creighton versus, let's get that KenPom score pulled up. North Dakota State, 85-63. Now, in the first game, Creighton took care of business. Don't have to worry about depth when you beat teams by 50 points. 105-54. Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman, Mason Miller, Ryan Kalkbrenner, and Stephen Ashworth make up your starting five. Off the bench, they brought Johnny Lawson, Josiah Dotzler, Frederick King, Francisco Farabello, who actually got 26 minutes in the blowout, and Isaac Trout. Now, I'm looking at this rotation as falling into a 7-man with the starting five plus Trout and Johnny Lawson. Farabello, maybe ends up being the 8th. He really doesn't do a whole lot for me. There's a ton of hype surrounding Lawson. A lot of people excited for what he can do in a Creighton jersey. They end up starting Mason Miller over him. Miller was pretty solid, 7 points, 8 rebounds. I think that does continue. Looking at the pricing for the starting five, Ryan Kalkbrenner at 9.6. That's just going to be super difficult to justify. We don't have the slam dunk value at our fingertips. We do have some value, yes, but we don't have the Ryan Dunn click in like, wow, that's super easy. You had 20 minutes from Kalkbrenner in a blowout game. This one won't be as big of a blowout, but it's definitely not going to be close. And Kalkbrenner just he learned this last year, and Johnny, you'll appreciate this. His rebounding prop's always like 5.5, 6.5. It's like, damn, that's so low for him. We just got to slam the over. But every time we slam the over on his rebounding prop, he turns around and gets 3 or 4 and just sends us packing. So kind of case in point there, just 4 rebounds against FAMU. That's just can't happen. 9.6, we're not paying that price. Now, if I were to pay for a Creighton player, Baylor Shireman would certainly be in consideration. Put up 29 fantasy points in just 20 minutes there, 15 and 8. He is somebody we can rely on heavily for rebounds, but that is a very steep price to pay for a reduced minutes Baylor Shireman. Trey Alexander up to 8.6. We liked him last game, and we used him in spots. Definitely produced 33.5 fantasy points, 24 and 5. But now that he's 8.6, that's going to be tough to kind of duplicate that. Even at 30, 35 fantasy points, at 8.6, we're not really getting the bang for our buck that we need. You have Ashworth there at 8.1. I do feel like he had a great game, by the way. He hit 5 triples. I do feel like anything over 8K is going to be too expensive for him. I feel like we need to have him slip into the low 7K range before we really start considering him for optimal builds. But at this moment, people are going to look at him and say, it looks fine to me. And I'm going to get a lot of, I've got 8.2 left in my lineup. Can I play Ashworth? You absolutely can play Ashworth, but he's very low priority for me here. Mason Miller, interesting at 5.5. Again, going to play mid-20s minutes, low 20s minutes because of the blowout. 8 rebounds for him. That's just another guy between Shireman and Miller taking rebounds away from Kalkbrenner. And Kalkbrenner as the giant on the court. He should be taking rebounds from them, and he just doesn't. So I don't know. I loved using Kalkbrenner at 4.7 all the time a couple years ago. Using him at 10K just seems gross negligence on the part of all of us here in the early non-con. So I say that, and he'll probably put up 50 tomorrow, but I can't do it. I can't do it with Kalkbrenner. Isaac Trout, who transferred in from Virginia in 21 minutes, hit 3 triples, 6 rebounds, 12 points, solid 24 fantasy points. I actually do like him at 4.8. I hate playing the blowout game and being like, okay, let's try to take some bench players here, because what happens if Creighton has an off night? What happens if they get pushed by, North Dakota State? We've seen all these teams, LSU, Cal, getting pushed by these teams. Creighton's obviously much better than either of those, but it's not unfathomable to think that this game could end up, if a team like Creighton gets off to a poor shooting start, maybe North Dakota State keeps it close. Maybe they are within 8 all game. Then all of a sudden it's like, damn, I used Trout expecting him to get 24 minutes and he's played 6. So I hate doing that, playing for blowout. I think it's a sucker move. And I think a lot of times it's over embellished by the masses that coaches are going to pull their guys in blowouts, because a lot of times they let them play down to the 2, 3, 4 minute mark because of point differentials and all these things needed to have on your tournament resume. So it's very dicey to when you start getting into that. It's a lot different when they're 3K, 4K, stuff like that. But when you start getting up to almost 5K, you really got to be right about a player coming off the bench. We saw yesterday with Corin Johnson in the 21 minutes he played, that was a miss. So that could very easily happen with a player like that. Farabelle at 4.4 doesn't do it for me. Frederick King is only good to me if Kalkbrenner is out like he was last year. King, very high fantasy point per minute player when given the minutes. This is a spot in a potential blowout where he makes sense, but again, we're not getting a huge discount with him either. I guess that leaves us with Jonathan Lawson at 4K, 15 minutes, 5 shots, 7 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and a block. I think Lawson, he's pretty solid at 4K. Would have loved to have seen him closer to the mid-20s minutes, over Farabello. That would have given me a little bit more confidence to kind of just like, hey, Lawson's the guy, let's go with him, and we're going to have all this flexibility in our lineup. But I'm not quite there with him just yet, but he's certainly in play, no doubt. On the North Dakota State side, they played 2 games, an overtime win over Western Michigan, and then Mount Marty Fly College, they beat just on Wednesday. So go back and look at their starters in Western Michigan. Bowden Skundberg, Damari Wheeler-Thomas, Andrew Morgan, Noah Fetterson, and Lance Waddles. That's Waddles, not Waddell. No relation. I don't say my name like that. He shouldn't either. Off the bench, they brought Shakari White, Tajavis Miller, and Jeremiah Burke. And those 3 guys all played mid-20s minutes. It was Noah Fetterson and Lance Waddles that played under 20 minutes, and there was very little foul trouble for either of them. So that's an interesting note. Skundberg played 39 minutes. That was in overtime. Wheeler-Thomas, 35, and Morgan, 27. All of them produced quite well. Andrew Morgan, 12 points, 13 rebounds. Skundberg, 25 points, 6 rebounds, 3 assists. Wheeler-Thomas, just the 5 points, but he did have 6 rebounds, 6 assists, contributed a great deal in those other categories. Jakari White off the bench had 15, hit 4 triples. Skundberg also hit 4 as well. In their game against Mount Marty McFly, same starting group, but Fetterson played 21 minutes. But of course, because of the massive blowout against a non-D1, it ended up creating a situation where the starters all played less than 22 minutes, and we saw Burke, Miller, White all off the bench. White played a reduced minutes as well. Leads me to believe that Shakari White is going to be one of their primary bench pieces, their 6th man, if you will, that's going to have a really big, significant role on this team. And he played 15 off the bench, had a 22% usage rate, 9 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists in those just under 20 minutes. So Shakari White's definitely going to be a dude for this team. Looking at it, Skundberg had 17 and 4, hit another 3 triples. Skundberg is a baller. He's going to be really good for this team, no doubt, taking 28 shots already through the first 2 games, but we are not getting a discount at 6.7. We really have to be right here if we're going to pay that price of 6.7. That could certainly get us into some trouble if we're wrong. Creighton locks him up. He has a bad shooting night. It's just going to end up being very, very painful. And we can't derive anything about what the Creighton 3-point defense is going to look like. They held Florida A&M to 1 for 7, but Florida A&M is really not very good. So I can't sit here and be like, yeah, their 3-point defense is elite. Skunberg does have, through the first 2 games, 30% usage rate, 30% shot rate, 57% from long range, drawing 7 fouls per 40. Certainly the guy on this team. And then Andrew Morgan, 36% usage rate, 35% offensive rebounding rate. Again, very early in the season. Morgan 5'7". He's at least a reduced price there. I actually don't mind Morgan if you want to go there with him. But foul trouble against that Creighton front court exists, and that is certainly going to make things a little bit difficult. If you want to get tricky and you have some GPP lineups, and perhaps even, we could use him in a main, Jakari White sitting there at 4-2. As I mentioned, he's clearly the best bench player they have. He's the sixth man. He's the guy that they're going to lean on. In the competitive game, he played a lot. In the blowout, he played less. Usually in those blowouts, you see those bench pieces play a lot more in the non-D1 games. So it leads me to believe that Jakari White is, in fact, going to be an important piece for this team. So I do like him at 4-2. And you go down and you look at his rates, 25% shot rate. He's made 4 of 6 triples already, has a very high block and steals rate. Somebody to definitely consider here for us at 4-2 in a value spot against Creighton. All we need is North Dakota State to get a little hot, keep this one close, and make it a game. And suddenly, mini stacks of this one could be interesting. So Creighton side, I like Lawson to a degree. I'm not prioritizing any of their starters. North Dakota State side, Skunberg is a dude, but Jakari White is the value piece that I'm going to get myself in trouble with as of this moment. All right, Western Carolina versus Notre Dame. Not a very interesting discussion. I am in a DM with several people, but one with a couple of older pre-band CBB players, Varnicus, Forsty, Rob, a lot of those guys. And we were having a discussion about who's worse in the ACC, Notre Dame or Louisville. Now, I think Notre Dame is going to be absolutely horrible. And when they get into ACC play, I think they're just going to get just dunked on. But when you see Louisville in their first 2 games, they escape UMBC by 1 and they lose by 10 to Chattanooga. It's hard to be like, well, shoot, they're probably not even going to beat Notre Dame. So I was on the team of Notre Dame's worse. But after seeing how they lost to Chattanooga today and barely beat UMBC, I have to probably say I'm likely wrong. Louisville is the worst of the 2. But this Notre Dame roster is not very good. They did beat Niagara 70-63 in their first game, but most of that game they were behind, and it looked pretty dire. Early on in the game, they got themselves down by 7-8, and it was like, hold on here, what's happening with this team? Now they are a short bench, so we like that for DFS purposes. They do have a coach who can really get the most out of his talent in Micah Shrewsbury. We saw that with him at Penn State, leading them as far as he did. So I have no doubt that he'll get these guys to play hard. But what I have doubts on, or can you play a group of Matt Zona, Tay Davis, Julian Roper, Braden Shrewsbury, and Marcus Burton 30-plus minutes a game? I have serious question marks about that. Matt Zona especially, I just don't know that he can play heavy minutes, and he played 17 in the game against Niagara. Tay Davis, who transferred in from Seton Hall, I think has massive upside. I've always liked Tay Davis, and I think he deserves to play a lot of minutes. Had a little bit of foul trouble in the first half against Niagara. Ended up playing just 18 minutes, 5 points, 5 rebounds, and a block. I do think Tay Davis is going to have some nice games here in the non-con, but he's going to end up being a low-usage player probably because of these guards. Julian Roper, who transferred in from Northwestern, has never really been healthy, had 9 points, 4 rebounds, 33 minutes played, somewhat lower usage rate. Braden Shrewsbury, very low usage rate, 7 points. In the exhibition, he looked good, did very little inside of peripherals as well, played 36 minutes, but a lot of empty minutes by Braden Shrewsbury. It was Marcus Burton who did basically everything. He took 20 shots, made 11 of them. Just 2 were triples, by the way. 6 of 6 at the line, 4 assists, 4 rebounds, 29 real. Marcus Burton is going to handle a lot of usage for this team. And I'm not being lazy in saying it just because they share the same first name or have the same stature as being a little bit on the smaller side, but you may remember a player by the name of Marcus Howard from Marquette a couple of years ago that just took every shot. It didn't matter if he had space, he chucked. that's the kind of season I'm expecting from Marcus Burton here as a freshman. And I think he's very interesting for all slates going forward because he's just going to end up taking 15 plus shots a game. And I think in games that he doesn't take 20, it's going to be like, wow, he didn't shoot very much tonight because he's going to chuck at a unfathomable level. Off the bench, they had three guys, Kerry Booth, Logan Imes, and J.R. Koningsine. They all played 14 plus minutes. Kerry Booth, 10 points, 9 rebounds. I think he's the most viable bench piece that they have and probably the most talented, but he's also a freshman. This is a very young team. They start 2 freshmen, a sophomore, a junior, and a senior. And then off the bench, they bring 2 freshmen and a sophomore. So this team is going to take their lumps all season long. They're playing Western Carolina, which is a team they theoretically should be able to beat, but it may surprise you here because I like some of these Western Carolina guys. And I think I might be betting them tomorrow as well. But Ken Palm has it 75-71. Notre Dame winning by a mere 4 points. That's certainly a intriguing spot to look at for a mini stack and to look at the Western Carolina guys. Now Burton, they got right. They priced him at 7-7. I think he's still in play at that 7-7 because he's going to have to play almost every minute. He's going to take almost every shot. He's going to relentlessly drive to the hole. He's just going to make stuff happen. So at 7-7, I think Burton is a great play, honestly. Somebody that I'm looking at heavily off the bench with Kerry Booth at 5'8". That's a little tougher because the minutes are going to be, kind of spiking at times and lower at others. Julian Roper at 5'4" is a no. I do think Shrewsbury at 4'9" can be used. Did play 36 minutes. Did show off an ability to score in the exhibition games. So he's there if you need that value. Matt Zona, Imes, no, thank you, no. Tay Davis is 3.9. I do like Tay Davis. I do think Tay Davis could see 25 minutes here, and that would be enough for him to pay off this mere 3.9 price point. So we do have a value, and he fills a forward slot that, like I said, is habitually and usually hard to fill. It wasn't so hard to fill tonight. Forwards were great, but typically each slate we're like, man, I wish I could play 8 guards. We all say it every day and think we're coming up with some new thought, but he fills a role there that we could certainly use him at. They may get Keba Njai, who does transfer from Penn State, along with Shrewsbury. He missed their game on Monday, dealing with a right hand injury that he, I believe, suffered in practice last week. So we'll see what happens there. He's 3'8", so that will be somebody else to cut into boost minutes there, and he could potentially even be a starter there based off of what I've read. So keep an eye on the starting 5 there, because if Tay Davis didn't start, I think I would certainly be a lot less interested there just because that would negatively impact him. The Western Carolina side has some plays. If they're only, Ken Palm's got them so close, then we're talking about some legitimate spots here for Western Carolina guys. Let's take a peek at the line here, shall we? +4 on DraftKings as well. Money line +145, total 140.5. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how we don't hit this Western Carolina +4. This looks like a fantastic spot. Looking at Western Carolina, they've only played 1 game so far. It was against mighty Dalton State, so hard to derive anything from that. But they did play their starters, most of their starters, 25-plus minutes. You love to see that. Starting 5 of DJ Campbell, Trey Jackson, Vontarius Woolbright, Russell Jones, and Charles Lampton. Now, Lampton played 14. He's their center. They did bring in off the bench Bernard Pelote, who played 22. But Russell Jones played 24, Woolbright 26, Jackson 28, and Campbell 30. Campbell was great, 18.6 rebounds. Jackson 12 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Woolbright 19 points, 7 assists, 8 rebounds. 6 turnovers. Hate to see that, but doesn't affect us that much. And then Russell Jones, 8 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists. Pelote off the bench had 14 and 6. Looking at Western Carolina prices, Woolbright predictably the most expensive. He would be the one I'm most like. I love Woolbright in this spot. Low major, high usage player who is right in my wheelhouse, that posh play of the day type range, 7 to 8K. He's going to play 35 minutes in this one. He's going to take a ton of shots. So he got himself to the foul line a ton in that last game, 9 of 14. I'm not certainly suggesting he's going to flirt with a triple-double again, but at 7K, he can easily obliterate 4X, 5X in this spot against Notre Dame. So I'm starting there with Vontarius Woolbright. He is a senior now, and you look at last year's efficiency numbers, not a very good three-point shooter over the course of his career, right around 25%, but he had the number one assist rate in the conference at 39.6, and that was in the Southern Conference. Then you look at overall, he had the 15th best assist rate in the country. So this kid can pass, he can make plays, he can get his teammates involved. We see that. 21.2% defensive rebounding rate, was ninth best in the conference. The number one fouls drawn rate in the conference. Number 3 usage rate, 12th best shot rate, and 8th most minutes by percentage. So we're talking about a player who is the leader of this team and is going to be fearless, relentless, and attacking of this Notre Dame defense. Love Woolbright at 7K. I would imagine most people would shy away from a spot like that, but trust me, this Notre Dame team is not what we're accustomed to seeing. They've been falling apart defensively the last few years. Woolbright's going to have a game. At 6'6", you can have Trey Jackson, who, again, just had that nice, 26.5 fantasy point game, 12 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Certainly don't mind him there as their point guard. DJ Campbell, somebody that sticks out to me at his price point of 5K, expecting him to play 30-plus minutes with ease. He played 30 in the non-D1 game. Very efficient, 7 of 9, 2 of 2. That would worry me a bit because he's clearly not going to shoot like that very often, right? 77% is kind of a hard mark to hit. But he did contribute in other categories, 6 rebounds, 2 assists, a block. Certainly like him at 5K. If you feel uncomfortable paying 7K for a player like Woolbright, or maybe you're just like, you know what, they're playing a high major. I don't care how bad Notre Dame is, they're not going to get it done, which obviously isn't true. We saw that today. Louisville, West Virginia, say hello. So Woolbright, if you're just not comfortable, or maybe you don't have that salary, 5K for Campbell makes a lot of sense to me. Off the bench there, you got Bernard Pelote at 5'4". That is a pretty tough spot, I think, off the bench there. You're asking a lot. If he were to jump into the starting lineup, I think he's somewhat viable. And then Russell Jones is there at 4'8", also going to play probably close to 30 minutes, if not more, and somebody who could certainly hit 4X at that 4'8" price. So I like the Western Carolina guys. I do. Woolbright and Campbell are two that I'm in on, and I might, run a little mini stack here. It's a smaller slate. Run it back with Burton on the other side. Potential for overtime, maybe in the 80s. This is just a very good spot. This is one of my favorite games here on the slate, believe it or not. Western Carolina versus Notre Dame. You know that we're getting it in when we're talking about Western Carolina Notre Dame on a Saturday in early November before Thanksgiving, and we're going to have to stream that game, and we're going to have to watch, and we're going to have to tilt every Woolbright shot until he pays off. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't know about you guys, but I'm looking forward to it. All right, next game on the slate, Seton Hall versus FDU. Now, Seton Hall is going to have to – they're going to have to prove a lot to me, but a lot to the industry as well. Nice win, 70-59 over St. Peter's. The big question with Seton Hall is how consistent or what version of Kadary Richmond are we going to see? We're going to see the Kadary Richmond that we saw against St. Peter's, 35 minutes of action, 18 points, 13 free throw attempts, 6 rebounds, 7 assists, a ridiculous 6 steals, slate breaker extraordinaire, likely somewhat chalky there at 8-3. He was chalk all the time last year, but then you would get those Kadary Richmond games where he refuses to shoot. He turns it over all the time. He throws up a 17 ball in 35 minutes, and he's just playing very lackluster. Now, he dealt with injuries a lot and played hurt and played limited, and that was definitely a problem. But having him have the capability of playing 34 minutes and scoring 17 scares the hell out of me. He is certainly somebody I'm going to be eyeballing here, especially with how good he did there. You take away the steals even. I mean, at almost 50, but 18, 6, and 7 at 8-3, like, we'll take that all day, no doubt. So got to love Kadary Richmond. The rest of the lineup, it's very guard heavy. Dre Davis, Alamir Dawes, Dylan Adewusu, and then the center they are going to be starting is Jaden Bediako, Santa Clara transfer. Also Charles Bediako's older brother. Off the bench, we saw Elijah Hutchins Everett, Isaiah Coleman, and Jaquan Sanders. That's basically the 8-man rotation that we're probably going to see from this team. They're going to play their 3-4 guards a lot of minutes. Davis, Dawes, Richmond, Adewusu, those guys they're gonna be on the floor a lot. So we can really consider pretty much any of them. Dre Davis, 14 and 5, 2 blocks. Dawes, 14 and 2, had a couple of steals. Adewusu had 10 points, 3 rebounds, 2 steals. Just gonna fill it up. I suspect that we're going to see a lot of usage or offensive production out of Bediako. Same with Hutchins Everett. It's just most of that scoring is going to come from those 4 and maybe the freshman Isaiah Coleman at times. So I'd like to keep my exposure typically to the Richmond, Dawes, Adewusu, Davis group. None of them are supremely cheap. If we're paying for Richmond at 8.3, I'm good. We can walk away there. If you don't want to trust Richmond and you like the potential leverage that's going to be offered, because trust me when I tell you Richmond's going to be chalk, and you're thinking, maybe he puts up a Jermaine Cuisinart game of 3x, then you definitely want to go down here and take like Dre Davis at 6'1", or Adewusu at 6'4". I think I'd probably stray a little from Dawes at 6'9", just because it feels high to me. He is really reliant on his scoring, but he is going to be chucking a lot. He was very efficient against St. Peter's, knocked down 4 of his 7 triples. But if those shots aren't falling, it's going to be hard for him to pay off almost 7K. He just doesn't do enough in those other categories. And Adewusu does. He's more of the peripherals guy. Dre Davis is a solid rebounder and does fill it up in all categories as well. And we're getting that discount at 6'1". So it makes too much sense for me to, if I'm fading Richmond, let me get the full discount 2K to Davis and move on. He would be my option there. For the Fairleigh Dickinson side, they have played 2 games so far. Penn State, Brandywine, and Buffalo beat Buffalo 92-86. Impressive win over a historically pretty solid Buffalo team, but they definitely gave it to them. They're well done to their social media team. They posted a graphic after the win over Penn State, Brandywine, and they used the Nittany Lions logo to show that they beat Penn State. I thought that was pretty damn solid work. They'll be playing another Penn State Schuylkill non-D1 here soon. They'll probably do the same thing, but they got these tough games against Seton Hall and St. Peter's coming up first. Now, Ken Palm has it 83-65 in favor of Seton Hall. I do like this Fairleigh Dickinson team. I think their defense is going to be horrible. And it has been for the last couple of seasons. I mean, they've just been so bad defensively. And Fairleigh Dickinson, historically, they're a team that we're used to seeing in the play-in games. And obviously, we know what they did last year, right? There's a lot of pressure for a 16 seed now because of them. Not really. But to the way they dispatched of Texas Southern and beat Purdue, it's it's really intriguing. And Tobin Anderson got himself a new gig out of it at Iona, so good for him. But this Fairleigh Dickinson team, I think they're, while still being good because they have some super, super good, talented players, I do think they ultimately take a step back. Looking at the roster, there are some dudes here returning. There's some continuity. The starting 5 against Buffalo was as follows. Joel Emmanuel, Ansley Almanor, Devontae Jameson, Joe Moondon, and Sean Moore. Now, Ansley is the player who we have typically seen be the higher price guy. He was a lot last year when Fairleigh Dickinson was on the slate late in the season, and he is their high usage shot taking guy that is going to be super involved. 33 minutes against Buffalo. Couldn't hit any of his shots, made 9, had 9 points, but he had 10 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal. Still contributed 27 fantasy points, despite the fact that he shot 2 for 12. Followed that up with a solid 9 for 12 against the Penn State non-Nittany Lions there, 24 real. 6'5" is an okay price point, but Seton Hall's defense is going to be a problem in this game for me. So I'm not sure I'm looking at him, but if you are using an FDU player, it makes a ton of sense to use him. Looking at his rates last year, 26% shot rate, 24% usage, 39% three-point shooter in conference, 38% overall, 3% block rate. Like, this guy does a lot of different things and is certainly the key piece for the team. Joel Emmanuel played 37 minutes, had 24 points and 11 rebounds against Buffalo. He's a sophomore, big-time rebounder, especially on the offensive glass last year. Played a reserve role, so very limited minutes, but he showed a knack for being able to rebound. He gets 2 straight starts to start the year. Showed out against Buffalo, 19 minutes against Penn State, 13-4 with 3 assists. He is somebody that is a little cheap at 5'2". The Seton Hall front court, I think, is going to be a foul-prone group themselves. And I kind of worry about Bediako, banging down there and just, I feel like he's going to be on the bench with 2 fouls a lot this year. So there is some upside for some of these front court players against them all year long, but certainly for FAU to potentially pay off, and that's somebody like Emmanuel. Moondin, the kind of third starter there at 5'9". I'm okay with him. And then you have Devontae Jameson, who played 27 minutes, had a usage rate of 30%, 17 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists against Buffalo. Also came up big, only 5'3" there. Has taken 17 shots through the 2 games. Pretty solid performer. 38 and 26 fantasy points in each of those first 2 games, 5.3. But again, that Seton Hall perimeter defense is going to be harassing, and I foresee a lot of turnovers for FDU's perimeter players. So I think if we are using an FDU player, it's probably Joel Emmanuel, but it's a very low-end option. I almost think I'd rather take Zagorowski against UConn for the same price, basically 5'3", than taking one of these FDU guys. That's kind of where my head is at right now with it. All right. Next game here, Tennessee Martin versus Mississippi State. Sweet. Must have made it. We got a troll in the chat. Yep, we're talking about college basketball, my friend. All right, so Mississippi State KenPom score 85-61. Big time projection there. In the first game against Arizona State, Mississippi State ran a pretty wide rotation. DJ Jeffries and Trey Fort both played over 30 minutes. Jimmy Bell, Deshaun Davis, and Cameron Matthews rounded out the starting 5, and then we saw Jaquan Scott, Sean Jones, Andrew Taylor, and Josh Hubbard as their main bench pieces. Josh Hubbard did not get enough minutes there, only 12, but we told you he's going to be a high usage guy. Did have the highest usage rate on the team at 30%. Scored 6 points, hit a couple triples, just needed some more minutes there. He is eventually going to work himself into a really nice role for this team. Speaking of Tennessee Martin, Trey Fort originally transferred in from Tennessee Martin, so a little bit of a, quote-unquote revenge game there. But Fort had a fantastic game in his first appearance with Mississippi State. I don't think anybody could have seen that happen. In those 33 minutes, 21 points, hit 5 of his 10 triples, massive volume, just sitting back there chucking threes, 2 rebounds, an assist, a block, and a steal. So I'm certainly looking at Trey Fort as a chase candidate. You also have to look down and see 6'6". There were several players around that range the last 2 days that had good first games, but hadn't shown it consistently over the past season, and they ended up being somewhat chalky and kind of fell on their faces in their second appearance. Now, the nice thing for Trey Fort is he's facing his former team, but also a very weak team that he should be able to do relative damage against. The other problem is that Fort's fantasy points, most of them, 21 of the 30, came on actual points, and he shot 50% from long range. So going to have to hit shots and continue scorching the nets to really pay off that 6'6" price. It helped that Shaquille Moore was out after violating team rules. That was an increase for him. There's various injuries. Obviously, Tomlo Smith is also going to be out for an extended period of time, so there are still minutes available there for Fort, but he's very reliant on his scoring. And really, for me, if I'm going to take a player that's going to be mostly reliant on all his scoring, it's got to be somebody like Cam Thomas level, right? When we know he's going to score 30 real, like he did at LSU. Hubbard's price bumped up to 5'1" as well. If he would have stayed around 3.8, I would have felt obligated to try him again. Didn't happen, so that is unfortunate. Jaquan Scott is at least interesting at almost min price 3-1. He was very good in their exhibitions, played about 12 minutes in the game against ASU. Again, a GPP value shot there for you at min price, being able to open some things up at top. I don't have a lot of love for Deshaun Davis at 6'3", Cam Matthews. I know Matthews put up almost 30. Nice solid game, 9 rebounds, 3 steals for him. Matthews can be hit or miss. You do get him at forward eligibility this season. I believe he was guard forward eligibility last year, but 7-1 is just a really steep price to pay for him. DJ Jeffries, that's a steep price for him at over 7K. And then Andrew Taylor, who came over from Marshall, kind of warmed like, hey, Taylor's not going to have that same role that he had at Marshall, where he's got the high usage rate, he's taking all the shots, he has a very high assist rate. He's going to play more of a reserve role for this team. So his price is going to have to come way down. And they had him at 9K there, wasn't playable, scored 10 fantasy points in 11 minutes, but his price still needs to come way down, even at 7.5 like it is now. We can start talking about looking at Taylor between 5 and 6K, and even then it's going to depend on how many minutes they're starting to give him as the season wears on and when Shaquille Moore returns. On the Tennessee Martin side, because most of you will not know anything about that team, they did play a non-D1 champion Christian, solid name, 104-76. The starting 5 for Tennessee Martin in that one: Issa Muhammad, Jacob Cruz, Jordan Sears, KK Curry, and Desmond Williams. Issa Muhammad was on the New Mexico State team last year before the season got thrown out for all that stuff. Before that happened, in 20 games, was fourth in the conference in defensive rebounding rate, 20.8%, overall 19%. Didn't shoot very well from long range, but didn't have volume. But on 2-point field goals alone, 61% from the field, 2.5% block rate, 1.5% steal rate, and had a usage rate above 19%. So Issa Muhammad was playing quite well in the WAC last year, and before they had to end up throwing out the season. And he was playing roughly 28 to 29 minutes over the last month of the season as a starter after coming off the bench. So clearly a guy that Tennessee Martin is going to look to. Foul trouble was an issue last year, 4.5 fouls per 40. I think that there's merit to using him, even in a tough spot here against Mississippi State. You look down at it, he's one of the cheaper starters on this roster at 4.6. I think people will look at that and probably consider it heavily, but then look at the matchup and move on because there is a lot of risk. However, the forward slot, again, being relatively tough on this particular slate, we have another value piece available to us that we can fill at the forward slot. And I know he's going to at least get minutes regardless of how things shake out. Jordan Sears checking in at 6'2". That's a bit too high. KK Curry at 5'7". The other starter there, Jacob Cruz, at 5'1". Cruz certainly in play there at 5'1". Does come with guard forward eligibility. I would suspect him to play upwards of 30 minutes for the Skyhawks team, and somebody that was really, really efficient in that game against champion Christian. You look at what he did over the last couple of seasons at North Florida: 26% shot rate, 31% three-point shooting percentage. Did regress some the following year at North Florida, but did miss time there due to injury and had to sit out most of the season. But he had a very, very strong freshman season. And coming out here to Tennessee Martin, he's going to be one of their key high usage guys. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So he's another guy that we can seriously consider there at 5'1". Gives us the option to use him as a forward and might be a little bit safer than Issa Muhammad because he is going to avoid some of that potential foul trouble there as a point guard, right? So I do like Sears a lot. We'll have the ball in his hands a lot, and somebody that, Jacob Cruz will have the ball in his hands a lot, and somebody that is going to be able to potentially pay off that 5K price point. Other guys like Desmond Williams, doesn't play enough as a starter, has a low usage rate historically. Don't have a lot of love for him. He is relatively cheap at 4.3, but I'd much rather play Muhammad. I'd much rather play Cruz. I'd much rather even potentially play Curry for 5'7" there. And those are really the range guys I'm looking at for Tennessee Martin. It might seem reckless. It might not be the best idea, but we're looking at a 7-game slate with very minimal options. And unless we're going to just full out stack Western Carolina, Notre Dame, probably going to have to take one of these Tennessee Martin starters. with the expectations that, yes, they could probably return 2x, and they likely will, but we're going to have to use them for salary savings here against this Mississippi State team. All right, and then we move on to Providence versus Milwaukee. This is a Providence team that we want to have a lot of exposure to. Under Kim English in their first game against Columbia, the predictable starting lineup: Bryce Hopkins, Jaden Pierre, Ticket Gaines, aka Devontae, Devin Carter, and Josh Oduro. An improved Corey Floyd is going to be their sixth man this year, most likely. Rafael Castro, the freshman Garwi Duell, and Rich Barron. That's the rotation that we're looking at. In that first game, Bryce Hopkins, 30% usage rate. You can get used to that. He's going to play heavy minutes, barring any kind of foul trouble. He's going to be on the floor 30, 35 minutes and have a usage rate north of 30% all season long. Had a double-double, 14 points, 10 rebounds. Jaden Pierre in 29 minutes, 9 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists. Ticket Gaines, 12 and 7. Devin Carter was solid, 13, 6 and 4 with a block and 3 steals, just filled it up. Josh Oduro, 6 points, 6 rebounds, had some early foul trouble, cost him some minutes, but he's certainly going to be a key piece for this Providence team. We know that for sure. Hopkins checks in at 8-4. I think when you look at the various pay-ups, obviously you have the 2 on Creighton there that are over 9K. That's a little bit too much. Trey Alexander at 8-6. That's probably too much. We were talking last year about not paying 7K for these guys because they cannibalize each other. Now it's going to be difficult to pay 2K more for them. Klingon has the downside of a blowout. So that really leaves us with Kadary Richmond at 8-3 and Bryce Hopkins at 8-4. And I do truly believe both of them will be highly rostered on this slate in all formats. Bryce Hopkins is my favorite player on the slate. Any price, I'm expecting a big performance from him. Also really like Devin Carter. Liked him a lot more last year when we had him at a reduced price, but this is the new pricing style of DK. Carter at 7-9 is got to be considered as well. I think I could get away from Oduro at 7K, even though I could see him having a pretty nice outing here. Was a little bit surprised to see Duell only play 5 minutes. Highly rated recruit, expected to be a big part of this rotation. Will be a very big fantasy asset when he does get minutes. It's just a matter of when that's going to happen, but I guess he's going to have to work his way up a little bit more. You do have Corey Floyd off the bench there playing over 20 minutes at 3-9. He is certainly in play there. Took 10 shots, only made 3, missed all 6 of his threes, but took a lot of shots there at 3-9. If 4 of those go down, you're talking about a guy making value pretty easily. Jaden Pierre at 4-7, coming off 30 minutes, 9 points, 2 rebounds, 3 assists. As we mentioned, wasn't the best game in the world, but taking that high minute guard role next to Hopkins, they had to fill that with Bynum gone. I think he's going to be a usable fantasy asset this season, starting out at 4-7. We can certainly look there. On the Milwaukee side, they played the non-D1, Wisconsin Stout. Love some of these non-D1 names. The starting 5 they rolled with Kentrell Pullian, Elijah Jameson, Faison Fields, Lyric Davis, and Zach Howell. Off the bench, Angelo Stewart and Markeith Browning both played 20 minutes. Aaron Franklin, Langston Wilson, and Eric Pratt rounded out the bench. Now, Langston Wilson may sound like a familiar name. Former top JUCO a couple of years ago, played for my Washington Huskies the last 2 years. Didn't really have a role for them, just didn't quite work out for him. But he's still a really good player and somebody that I would like to see do well. Faison Fields transferred in from Old Dominion. He's somebody who had a relatively strong offensive rebounding rate and block rate, center that can make things happen as a shot blocker. Looking at the price points for Milwaukee, it's going to be a tough ask to use any front court players from Milwaukee because I do think Josh Oduro is just going to get them in foul trouble, but Fields does check in at just 4-8. D'Angelo Stewart off the bench at 3-8, a 20-minute role perhaps, shot 11 times, 4 of 7 from long range. Mostly got his fantasy points from scoring. I would wait to see if his minutes are going to normalize there before we start jumping all in by any means, but he is a guy that's going to be in the rotation, obviously. Langston Wilson's there at 3-6. I think he makes sense as a GPP play. Had 20 fantasy points in 12 minutes, but consider the opponent. Potential foul trouble looming for other players at his position could thrust him into a bigger role. They have him categorized as a guard on DraftKings, though, which is a mistake. So that's tough because if we are going to use him, we want to use him in that forward slot, which is harder to fill. So that does kind of take him out of consideration for me because our guard spots are too valuable to be able to just throw away on Langston Wilson. Markeith Browning at 5'3". I think he's very interesting. He only had 3 real points, but he put up 25 fantasy points. 7 assists, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks, and a steal. Markeith Browning is somebody that I'm surprised didn't start over Davis in that first game. He started a lot last year, started out as a bench piece, and then ended up starting majority of the year. So it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Browning end up starting this game just because it's going to be up against Providence, and they need one of their best players out there above Lyric Davis. Kentrell Pullian was the top player in that game. 16 points, 12 rebounds, 3 assists. Pullian, pretty impressive numbers, 12 rebounds for a 6-foot guard. But he is 6'5". You look at that 44 and be like, damn, that's really good. Clearly, or most likely, not going to put up 44 against Providence, but definitely going to have a high usage role on this team. Pullian and Browning is a real nice real nice backcourt that is going to be able to do some damage in the horizon this year. And they're 2 guys that I have my eye on, depending on how that starting lineup shakes out. Now, it is one of the last games on the slate, so we don't have that ability to just wait and see. We have to have other swaps in play. But I do think this is a game you could have 2, potentially 3 pieces of and feel pretty good about it. There are a lot of plays in that 4.8 to 6K range that to me are viable, and that kind of goes against the natural tendency of the industry to go stars and scrubs. We can go a little bit more balanced on this slate, and I think we'll end up fairly well off because of it. They're getting 4 on DraftKings, Johnny. I guess it depends on where you look, but yeah, Western Carolina is in play. All right, so that wraps up the slate. Let's talk about core. Got to start with Bryce Hopkins. Top pay up, easy play at that 8.4 price. We've seen him just detonate many times. Fouls do creep up. I would hate to see him get a little bit too grabby, handsy, whatever you want to call it, and have to sit with 2. There is potentially like an 8% chance that this play fails, but I'm very confident, and he's going to be super chalky either way. So that's core play number 1. Core play number 2 is going to be on Western Carolina. Now, I have the caveat that if you are uncomfortable with it or you just can't afford it, DJ Campbell is there at 5K, and I would encourage you to play him. But Vontarius Woolbright, I am not going to designate posh play of the day just yet. I said I wanted to wait at least a week, maybe 2, to kind of see how things shake out rotation-wise and what people are doing with ownerships. But if there was a posh play of the day for this slate, Vontarius Woolbright would man that spot and be our sneak of the slate. So Woolbright, core play number 2. And then the third, I really want one of these Tennessee Martin guys. I feel like I might get myself in a little bit of trouble here with all the various options of low major guys. But I will go over and take Marcus Burton from Notre Dame. That Western Carolina Notre Dame game, looking at all the potential blowouts and the slower paces and just the overall ugliness of this slate, to me, Western Carolina Notre Dame is one of the best fantasy environments of the entire slate. And I think both sides are going to end up on the optimal with at least 2 or 3 plays. Not from each, but from the game. So that's the core that we're going to roll with. We are going to bet. We'll see if we get a better number. You said 4.5 probably, I'm sure, on your little Boyd app or whatever you're using. But I do have +4 here on DraftKings. If you have a book with a better number, I would encourage you to obviously hit that. But that's one of my top bets of the day. Western Carolina +4 against Notre Dame just feels very, very good. Fordham versus Cornell, and they're -1.5, just like them straight up. George Washington versus William & Mary. This George Washington team might be for real. As I mentioned, if you haven't heard of Garrett Johnson and the struggle with cancer and coming back and just lighting the world on fire in that first game, that's a really cool story. Love George Washington. I think they're going to surprise a lot of people, and I think it starts with this weekend and people getting a chance to actually pay attention on a smaller slate. -10 is a lot against William & Mary, but I do believe George Washington covers that 10. and they do it quite easily against William and Mary. So that's another one that I'm fairly high on. Getting to the prop market, let's see. We don't have a whole lot yet, I don't think. Yeah, so DK doesn't have any individual props up, so we won't waste our time and energy there. Let's go over to PrizePicks and see what the board says there. They're probably not going to have a lot because a lot of these games, they're not going to know how to properly project points. And yeah, they don't have any CBB there either. So that will wrap it up. I appreciate those of you who hung out with me late on a Friday night, over an hour show, but we have really done I think a good job covering this 1-7 gamer. You can expect us to be back next Monday, covering that big Tuesday slate when it comes to CBB shows. And there's going to be a slate breakdown / write-up for every single slate this year that is considered a main, which means on Saturdays with the multi-college basketball slates, they'll just be the one main slate, but you don't have to ask me, is there going to be content today? If there's a slate, there will be content. Appreciate everyone who continues to support the show. Make sure you hit the like button, share it, tell your friends, code NIGHTHOOPS, NIGHTHOOPS, 50% off your first month. Take care, guys. Back tomorrow morning, 8 a.m., 1 hour before our lock CFB show. Have your questions ready. Back again Monday night, college basketball. Let's keep rolling. Keep them green screens coming, and let's have some fun. See you.